Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. My name is Laekan Zea Kemp. I'm a Chicana Kidlit author living in Austin, Texas. My debut novel, Somewhere Between Bitter and Sweet, was a 2022 Put a Bell Prey Honor recipient. My most recent YA novel, and also the book that I'm here to talk about today, is An Appetite for Miracles. My second middle grade, Omega Morales and the Curse of El Cucuy, comes out next week on October 10th. And I also have an upcoming picture book called Desert Song out from Neil Porter Books in the summer of 2024. I have 3 objectives when it comes to storytelling: to make people laugh, cry, and crave Mexican food. And my work celebrates Chicane grit, resilience, creativity, and joy while exploring themes of identity and mental health, which is the theme of our panel tonight. Before we get started, we ask that you please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. Also, if you are a school, classroom, librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. You can enter to win a free virtual visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. You can find the link to enter in the chat as well. And during tonight's discussion, we'll also be giving away some specially curated book boxes featuring books by our festival authors, as well as festival swag. To enter, all you have to do is fill out the form, which we will also be dropping in the chat. So now that all of those logistics are out of the way, let's get started with introductions. Francisco, can you please tell us about you and your latest book?
Sure. My name is Francisco Stork. I was born in Mexico a long time ago, and I came to El Paso, Texas with my adoptive father, Charlie Stork, hence this very un-Latina sounding last name. Grew up in El Paso and ended up going to, eventually I went to Harvard to study graduate school and then to law school to try to make a living while I was writing. So most of my books I wrote while I was a practicing lawyer, working for a housing agency that tried to build affordable housing. I Am Not Alone is my 10th novel, and it's a story of 2 young people. Alberto is an undocumented immigrant from Mexico who is working in Brooklyn, lives with his sister and her little baby, sends money back home. And it's a story in the week of the beginning of what he hears. He begins to feel an auditory hallucination that is probably going to be the beginnings of schizophrenia. And at the same time, it's the story of Grace, who befriends Alberto Grace is the total opposite of him. She is affluent, on her way to Princeton and medical school, has a supportive boyfriend, and yet she's beginning to kind of question the values that she's growing up with. And when she meets Alberto, their connection is explosive and immediate. However, he's accused of a crime that he's not sure that he committed because of his deteriorating mental condition. And so Grace must decide, whether she wants to put her future on the line for this young person who's beginning to show signs of a mental illness.
Thank you so much, Hailey.
Hi, my name is Hailey Alcaraz, and I am Mexican American in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm a former 8th grade English teacher of about 9 years. I recently left to work for an educational nonprofit, but my debut is called Up in Flames. It came out yesterday, and it's about a girl named Ruby Ortega who lives in Southern California. She comes from a very privileged and affluent background. She, like myself, is a biracial, white-passing Latina, and so a lot of her privilege and her worldview is packed into that identity, which ultimately gets challenged when her hometown is destroyed by wildfires, and she's forced to both help her family recover, but also connect with a lot of the community who has been inequitably affected by the wildfire, namely some of the undocumented people who live within her hometown. So she goes on a journey of major loss and recovery, but also shows a lot of resilience and strengthen the relationships she builds as it broadens her worldview and tries to make her community a better place.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And congrats on your debut. Federico?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Federico Erebia. I am a retired physician, woodworker, and author at this point. Like my main characters, I'm gay, Mexican-American, neurodivergent, and I live with a variety of mental health challenges. Pedro and Daniel is my debut novel. Oops, this is backwards. It is a fictionalized retelling of my relationship with my younger brother, Daniel, who was about 15 months younger than me. The brothers experience joy and laughter as they endure abuses, coming out, first loves, first jobs, and the AIDS pandemic in a coming-of-age story unlike any other. I'll talk more about it as we kind of go on with the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, I'm Laekan Zea Kemp. My latest YA novel, An Appetite for Miracles, is a dual point of view contemporary romance and also my first novel in verse. Dana's grandfather is slowly losing himself as his memories fade, and Dana's not sure her plan to help him remember through the foods he once reviewed will be enough to bring him back, especially when her own love of food makes her complicated relationship with her mother even more difficult. Raul has been lost ever since his mother was wrongfully incarcerated 2 years ago. Playing guitar for the elderly has been his only escape to help them remember and him forget. But when his mom unexpectedly comes back into his life, what is he supposed to do when she isn't the same person who left? When Dana and Raul meet, sparks fly immediately, and they embark on a mission to heal her grandfather and themselves, because healing is something best done together, even if healing doesn't always look the way we want it to. Before we get into the questions, I wanted to ground this conversation in some in some statistics related to the Latinx community and mental health. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, only 20% of Latinx with mental health symptoms talk to a doctor about their concerns, and only 10% end up contacting a mental health specialist. As of 2013, the psychology workforce was 83.6% white. And for many Latinx seeking therapy, 50% do not return after their first session. As recently as 2015, Latina teens had the highest rate of suicide attempts, and 15% of Latinas attempted to take their own lives. And then there's the immigrant paradox, which is defined as a phenomenon where children born in the U.S. to immigrant parents are more likely to experience higher rates of mental health problems than children who were born elsewhere and immigrated to the U.S. According to a 2020 study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, the longer immigrants spend in the US, the higher their risk of psychiatric disorders becomes. These numbers are the reason why these books are so important and why this conversation is so important. So I want to first thank each of you for writing stories that are so desperately needed. And I also want to thank all of the educators who are here and who are committed to getting these stories into the hands of the kids who need them the most. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I want to start by asking, when in your own life do you think you first realized the importance of taking care of your mental health? And is there a particular book that may have played a role in that journey? Francisco?
Well, the way you phrased the question is, when did we realize the importance of taking care of our mental health? Which could happen in my case a long time after I first started experiencing, some of the symptoms, which started when I was a teenager after my adopted father died when I was 13. I mean, I didn't have the name for what was happening to me at the time. All I knew was sort of the pain associated with mental illness. Unfortunately, when the first time that I really started to recognize the importance of taking care of that of the mental illness was in my late 40s, when I saw that the mental illness was not only hurting myself but was hurting others. So it was at the time that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, something which was new to me. I had always thought that some of the things that I was doing, kind of acting out, was more of a self-medication for depression. But this was, I was lucky enough to find someone who gave me the right diagnosis, who put me in the right, found the right medication and found the right dosage, which I've been taking since then and probably will continue to take until the end of my life. But it's really the thing with bipolar disorder is really it's really the effects that it could have on your family, on your fellow workers, the hurt, economic hurt, emotional hurt, and sometimes even physical hurt. And so, that was kind of a rock bottom moment where you sort of realize that that I needed help, and so unfortunately it took a long time for me to get there. And one of the reasons I write these books is in the hope that some of the young people who were going through the same things that I went through when I was a kid could sort of recognize what is happening to them and get to a point of taking care of their mental health a lot sooner than I did.
Yeah, those models are so incredibly important. What about you, Hailey?
For me, I think I really first encountered my first mental health issues. I feel like where my first struggles were when I first became a teacher. I was fresh out of college, and I know a lot of educators can probably relate to this. I was really taking a lot of secondhand trauma from students and trying to grapple with all the stress of managing a classroom and learning a new profession. And it is high stakes. You care very deeply about what you're doing. I don't feel like mental health was a very big part of my upbringing. I had a lot of privileges and I had a very supportive family, but it wasn't an explicit conversation in my household. I'm also firstborn, eldest daughter, so I feel like there was a lot of pressure and just kind of like the image of what I thought I was supposed to be, and struggling with my mental health and well-being, which wasn't something that I thought was appropriate or needed or realistic. So I kind of had like the resilience and grit mindset, but not in a very healthy way. And I definitely carried that into young adulthood. And so as I became a first year teacher and as I really started to get my feet wet and what it was like to be involved in a career I cared so deeply about and about being in the life of young people, that's when I really encountered problems and I realized how important it was. You can't pour from an empty cup. So you got to take the time to take care of your own needs in order to be able to serve others. I love reading. There's a lot of books. I take a lot of solace in audiobooks in particular when I'm stressed, just because you can do a little multitasking. And so it really puts me in a calming headspace. But also, just writing in general is a way I process things, whether it's fiction or whether it's a blog or a diary or anything like that. I definitely think that helps my mental health feel much more balanced and healing for me.
Yeah, I relate to everything you're saying about being a teacher and how that makes you realize the importance of self-care. And like you said, the inability to pour from an empty cup. I definitely had my own similar revelations when I was in the classroom, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But what about you, Federico?
Yeah, so I would say that I wrote the first line of Pedro and Daniel very deliberately so that the reader would understand that at ages 6 and 5, Pedro and Daniel had already known physical, verbal, and emotional abuse, that they lived in fear, and that their mother was a sort of monster to them. She was always a threat to them. So that is to say that I've always been aware of my mental health. Like Francisco, I didn't have names for it. I didn't know what it meant, but I definitely was aware that I suffered, usually silently. But I also think that it's important for us to remember that we all have mental health, just like medical health. We need medical health care and we need mental health care. They're both so important. And obviously, sadly, something that we don't really think about too often in terms of our government and how we approach healthcare and insurance. One of the first books that opened my eyes to the challenges of children under stress was Lord of the Flies. It's a story where a group of boys are stranded on an island, and they are forced to work together and to govern themselves, often not very well, because they don't have the tools or the experience. But it was one of the first books where I saw boys dealing with some of the same issues I had in my life. So it was really, imagine 1960s, 1970s. There weren't a lot of books of people of color, of a Latino, with mental health issues or having stress or having abuse or whatever. So it was a very difficult read for me because of the content and the triggers, but at the same time made me realize that there were others who had these types of things that they were suffering, in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I appreciate the connection you made earlier between the mental and the physical. For me, my anxiety and depression often manifests physically. And so there have been times when I've been really ill because I wasn't taking good care of myself, or maybe I should rephrase that as I wasn't able to take good care of myself due to lack of knowledge and resources. But like you, Hailey, during my last year in the classroom as a high school ESL teacher, I started experiencing a lot of physical symptoms. There were just a lot of traumatic events that happened that school year, both to me and my students, and carrying that, that's when I finally started trying to educate myself. So it wasn't until my body was like basically screaming at me to pay attention that I finally did. But another big piece of that, and what really allowed me to listen to my body in that moment, was seeing people I really admired talking openly about their mental health struggles on social media. In particular, there were some authors that I really admired who were speaking very candidly about it and about seeking treatment, and seeing that really made all the difference for me. And as far as books that have helped me on my journey, On Jellicoe Road by Milena Marchetta was a book that I fell in love with when I first read it when I was about 12 or 13. But then I found myself returning to it, years later when my real life was starting to mirror some of the events of the book. And when I say mirror, I mean like almost exact. I experienced a lot of trauma in my teen years, and that story in particular became sort of my anchor and gave me something solid to hold on to when the rest of my life felt so scary and out of control. And of course, all we can hope is that our books are able to do that for others. Being that this panel is geared towards educators and librarians who I know are probably thinking of very specific students and patrons who need stories like ours, can each of you talk about the specific types of mental health issues and/or diagnoses that are represented in your book and why you chose to include those? Francisco?
Yes. Well, I mean, for Alberto, I think it's it's the onset of schizophrenia. I mean, the term is schizophrenia itself is not really mentioned until kind of the end of the book. and the only symptoms that are really portrayed are the auditory hallucination, that Alberto hears a voice, and in an effort to minimize kind of the fear that he has to this voice, he calls it Captain America, and it's a critical voice. It's not constant, but it's a critical voice that kind of judges him and kind of evaluates in a negative way some of the things that he's doing, what I wanted to do, I think, is to portray not just that specific symptom of schizophrenia, because auditory hallucinations don't happen to all of us, but in a broader way, what I think what the book will do is you begin to realize the different voices that we all hear, whether they be kind of in the realm of hallucination or not. I mean, I think that we all kind of respond to voices from our society, from social media, from and we let them kind of become our own, and a lot of the times those voices are negative and critical, especially if you're an immigrant. A lot of them the voices are sort of in the nature of you're not good enough, or you're you don't belong, and so those are kind of even though the book is specifically kind of about the beginning symptoms of schizophrenia, what I'm hoping is that the reader will recognize, I think, some of the mental issues that we all kind of have. I with mental illness, I feel that it's not really mental illness is not something that is different in kind. It's just more different in degree. Kind of we're all kind of in this spectrum, and sort of the little things that we consider kind of different for us that happen every once in a while are kind of more in the extreme for people who cannot control that situation. So that's kind of what I wanted to portray, and in Grace, the young person, I think it was more of a question of meaning, like what does it really mean to be successful, and why am I doing all of this? There has to be like a real purpose behind it. So it's a more, it's kind of a different kind of a different kind of questioning that Alberto does, and but it's also, I think, quite important that it take place.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said about the fact that we are all dealing with something. It just varies in terms of degrees. And I think that's a good reminder for people, especially young people who maybe haven't been engaged in a lot of conversations around mental health. It's important to know that we all deal with something and should be able to relate to each other, at least on that level. What about you, Hailey?
What you just said really resonates with me, because my character, Ruby, she isn't someone with a specific diagnosis. She is someone who encounters serious trauma through the course of her story. And I think that is a reminder to all of us that, I mean, trauma can happen to anybody, and hardships can happen to anybody. And, your mental health can suffer as a consequence at any time, often with no warning or notice. So obviously, Ruby's community is wrecked by wildfire. She goes through a very significant personal loss through all of this. And she tries to navigate it, kind of being promoted as the head of her family as they try and recover from everything. Our story captures her probably before she starts to have her PTSD, as she's still very much in the thick of the trauma that she's experiencing. And so it kind of just chronicles her as she's still very much grappling with it and trying to make those connections and learn to ask for help, because that's not something that is accustomed to doing. I think her story really challenges the idea of kind of like toxic grit and toxic resilience, the idea that we can overcome things just by kind of like putting our head down and working through it. Ruby's story hopefully is a message to young people that getting through something often means taking a step back and asking for help or slowing down. It doesn't mean that you have to carry the burden alone. It doesn't mean that you are weak for asking for help. That strength and resilience can look a lot of different ways given the scenario, and that it's okay to take a moment and figure out what that looks like for you.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was thinking we haven't gotten to this yet necessarily about, the stigma that exists within the Latinx community about mental health. But it strikes me as so strange that our community is so community oriented in every other way imaginable. And yet when it comes to mental health, it's something that a lot of us end up having to suffer with alone, or at least that's been the case in my family for generations. And I think if we could just tap into those, natural tendencies to be in community and care for each other the way we do in other aspects of our lives, we could tackle some of these problems in just a better, more efficient way. Like you were saying, it's important to ask for help. It's important to rely on others. And that's exactly what we should be doing. What about you, Federico?
Yeah, so the stories and the scenes in Pedro and Daniel deal with a variety of challenges for marginalized folks, as well as social and societal issues, including depression, anxiety, suicidality, OCD, PTSD, food insecurity and hunger, domestic violence, and the various types of abuse that one person can inflict on another person, colorism, racism, homophobia, autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and stutter. In many cases, I don't use these particular words, but the representation is clear, especially for those who have lived them. I do want to make it clear that I don't consider neurodivergent conditions to be mental health conditions. I believe that they are more neurological and medical. But we all know that there is a significant intersectionality between all of the topics that I've mentioned. Some of what you just said, Laekan, resonated because mental health is similar to how we used to hide and be embarrassed to talk about cancer. Even to some extent, it's still the case, but, in our Latino community growing up, you could not say the word cancer. You had to allude to, having it. Later on, it was similar with HIV and AIDS. People did not want to say those words. People didn't want to know, didn't want others to know that they had it, or that their child or someone else had it. And I mentioned that in the book, that my mother did not want anyone to know that my brother had HIV, which is definitely a sore point for me.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this idea that being ill is some kind of personal failing. At least that's the sentiment that I feel in my own family, or have felt. And so, yeah, I think it's so important that we talk about these things and make it clear, especially to young people, that it is not. It is not a moral failing, and it is not your fault, no matter what you're dealing with, whether it's a physical or mental illness. In An Appetite for Miracles, Dana is dealing with generalized anxiety that is compounded by her grandfather being diagnosed with dementia, and also by the fact that her mother is quite an angry person for reasons that later reveal themselves. But she's very controlling, and especially when it comes to Dana's body and how she looks and what she eats. So Dana is also struggling with her relationship with food. Raul, on the other hand, struggles with depression and the things that can come with that, like apathy and hopelessness. He's really struggling, especially to care about school. And yet him doing well in school is all his mother cares about. And then when she finally comes home from prison after being wrongfully incarcerated for 2 years, and she's dealing with severe PTSD, he feels even more helpless and overwhelmed, and like he just can't measure up to her expectations of him. As I mentioned in my introduction, my mental health is a topic that is present in all of my novels, and that mostly just comes from being a person who has mental health issues, but it also comes from being a Latina and growing up in a culture that heavily stigmatized these issues, as we've just been talking about, which I feel like did delay me getting the care I needed for decades, until I was, almost in my 30s. And so my goal now is just to normalize these things as much as I can, and to give the young people reading my books better examples. We've been talking about models and the importance of models for how to talk about and deal with these things. And for me, it's almost as if every time one of my characters has access to resources or support that I didn't, I'm sort of healing that teenage version of me. But the sharing of those stories is also just as important to that healing process, which is why I would love for us to do some sharing now. So I would love it if each of you would be willing to read an excerpt from your novel and talk about the importance of that particular moment in the story. Francisco?
Sure. I'm just going to read you a couple of pages from the very beginning of the book. And I'll tell you why I chose that afterwards. But time to be free. Alberto opened his eyes when he heard the voice. He was in bed, the gray light of dawn outside his window. There was no one else in the room. It was the same voice he had heard a dozen or so times the past month. A man's voice, not angry, not loud, not like when Wayne yelled at him to do something. The voice was insistent, nagging, high-pitched sometimes. Alberto didn't fear what it said or how it sounded as much as the fact that it was there, so real. There was sweat on his temples, on his legs. The first time Alberto heard the voice, he was riding the subway. The voice whispered, "I got you." Alberto thought there was someone behind him, but there was no one close to him. Sometimes the voice came when he was working and sometimes when he was holding baby Chato. Now here it was again, telling him it was time to be free, whatever that meant. A dream. Lupe had once told him that one day he would even dream in English. Had the 6 months of evening classes at Brooklyn College finally paid off? But if the voice was a dream, even if it was in English, why was he trembling? The voices in dreams are invisible. This voice shone like a neon light. So that's kind of like the first page of the novel. And, there are other suspenseful, action-packed places in the novel. But I wanted to read that because when I write about these books, and I've written about a young boy with mental illness here, and I've written about a young girl with the day after a suicide attempt, and I've written about a young boy with autism. All of these books, it is very important to create a sense of trust with the reader, even from the very beginning. Some of these topics are very serious and can be triggering, to people who are reading these books, and so it's very important to kind of have a sense of that the readers kind of feels that this is someone who's not going to hurt me. And this is a book that is eventually going to be hopeful, regardless of, you've heard the different topics that we've all deal with, and you're probably saying, oh my God, I don't know if I want to read that. But the fact of the matter is that these books are really kind of uplifting, in some ways, and I think all of us try extra care when we're writing this book to think of the reader who is going to be reading these things, and to make sure that these books push him or her in the right direction, which is a direction towards healing. So the first few pages of a book are just incredibly important to me, because I want the reader to feel that kind of sense of an author they can trust behind them, but also to see that the person that they're going to be reading about, this character, is not just an individual with symptoms, right? It's a person, and what I really want to create is a character that is a person first, and also happens to have a certain illness, and all of those things I think happen at the very beginning of the book.
Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed that out about your introduction, how you think about it and inviting the reader in, because I know most teachers know this and most librarians know this, but I really do feel like when those of us who are writing for young people, especially those of us writing about mental health, we really want to partner with these educators and these adults in creating safe spaces for kids to explore these things, for these conversations to take place. And so I'm glad that you articulated that, because I know that that's how a lot of us feel when we're writing. We're very careful and we're very thoughtful, and it's important. What about you, Hailey?
I have a passage about a third of the way through the book when Ruby is just arriving home to her community after the wildfires have hit. The sight of the devastated land shocked her. Even now, she couldn't believe how much destruction the fires had caused. There is a lot of work to be done, yes, Mama Ortega said sympathetically. Ruby thought that was a serious understatement, but her grandmother continued before she could cut in. The bed and breakfast is still standing, at least. Ruby snorted dejectedly. True, it hadn't burned down. The silhouette was still more or less familiar, but even from a distance, it was clear it had suffered serious damage. The white walls of the barnyard exterior were coated black and gray. The beautiful thing about trees and plants is they grow back, mi amor, Mama Ortega said, gesturing at the masses of skeletal tree branches and dark stumps. I need to go down there and figure out what exactly can be salvaged, what needs to be done, Ruby responded heavily. I just haven't been able to make myself do it yet. Mama Ortega made another noise of agreement and patted her hand. We've been dealing with a lot. It's okay. Things like this, they take time. The sun had almost sunk beyond the distant hills, and even though Ruby knew the fires in the visible distance had all been extinguished, the orange glow of the sky against the dark terrain made it still look like her world was very much ablaze. It turned her stomach. She thought of the distinct feeling of love and connection she'd felt for this place the night she'd stood here just before she left for college. This may not have been the place she remembered, but it was at least something. Something unfamiliar and ugly, yes, but something. I know it seems impossible now, but Ortegas have a long history of overcoming hardship. Ruby's grandmother took her hand and held it in her lap. Though I wish it never would have come to this, I know we'll get through it together. Ruby's eyes swept over the yard once more, the last bit of sunlight now gone, rendering the land before them a shadowy mosaic of blacks and grays. We'll be okay, Mama Ortega said. It'll be hard, and it will probably be different than before, but it'll be okay. And I chose that passage just because it does show my main character, who is, like I said, kind of would describe herself as very strong. It shows her in a moment of vulnerability. It shows her in a moment of asking for help, and it shows her grandmother supporting her when she needs it most. And I think that is a good step for her in seeing just the kind of the power of relationships and the options that she has available to her as she navigates this trauma.
Absolutely. And it was really beautiful too. And Federico?
Yeah, so in this scene, Pedro is working as a handyman. He has struggled with symptoms of depression, anxiety, suicidality, and PTSD due to many years of physical, verbal, and emotional abuse he has endured at the hands of his mother. He has a very low self-esteem and sense of self-worth in this scene. I use humor and poetry to help convey the complexities of the emotions. They're based on real events, so I may get a little emotional while reading it. I practice a lot, so hopefully it'll be fine. Mrs. Ludetsky and I are working in her yard when I get an abrupt image of her friend, Mr. Martin, who hired me last summer for similar work. It's how I met Mrs. Ludetsky, although I can't remember how I met him. When Mr. Martin came to my house to pick me up, wearing a leopard print silk cravat, starched white shirt, sharply pleated nautical themed pants, a light blue blazer, a Panama hat, a large jeweled signet ring on each pinky, and a slight lisp, I could tell he was gay. My older sister warned Mom that I shouldn't go with this man to his house, but she couldn't explain why. Not in the vulgar Spanish words Mom would need to hear to understand the concern. But I knew what she meant. All Mom saw in this man was cash money at the end of the day, so I went along with him. It was an uneventful summer day of yard work. He was just a man who needed help getting his summer home ready for summer entertaining. I returned to his house for one banal afternoon after another. My sister's concerns that I would be corrupted were biased and unfounded. One day, Mrs. Ludetsky waltzed onto the manicured lawn in a wispy ankle-length caftan and matching headscarf. Her sophisticated sunglasses and oversized costume jewelry were artistic accomplishments. Her lips were a luscious crimson. To my eye, she was only missing a glamorous pair of platform booties on her feet. She and I spoke for a while. Then I agreed to start working for her the following week. it suddenly occurs to me that Mom did understand my sister. Of course she did. With an all stops pulled, towering maricon specimen standing in front of us, my sister's concern was a pestering annoyance my mom callously swatted away. Although Mr. Martin was never a threat, Mom did not care who he was, what he might be, or what might happen to me when I left with him. As long as I made money for her, as long as I handed her cash at the end of my shift. She knew what she would get for my service to Mr. Martin. She simply didn't care what that service might entail. They had negotiated my price as I stood there in front of them. I could have been standing on an auction block. Mom had pimped me out without a whisper of concern. She truly believes she owns me, my body, that she can sell me, she can rent me, she can discard me. Mrs. Ludetsky and I burned the brush and leaves in a large fire in an isolated area. I both enjoy and dislike the smell and the heat of the fire. I am enraptured when thick gray smoke engulfs me, consumes me, suddenly, voraciously, completely. This controlled danger to the newly controlled chaos in my head calls out. I stand mesmerized. My eyes sting. My eyes water. Is it because of the smoke or my immense sadness? Chaos calls this coward. My eyes fill. My eyes spill. Is it because of the smoke or my immense sadness? I yearn to dive in, to make it all stop. A cough startles me out of my stupor. My eyes overflow. Is it because of the smoke or my immense sadness? That's it.
Thank you so much. It's written so beautifully. I can't even, my novel's a novel in verse. I know yours is as well. And I can't imagine like how beautiful it looks on the page. I mean, I just could imagine it in my head, like while you were reading it. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
I don't know how to follow that up. It's no wonder your book has so many incredible starred trade reviews. I am just going to read 2 short poems from Raul's point of view. This section is kind of where he's reflecting on his mother's absence and just this very unique kind of loss that he's experiencing. And this first poem is called Nemesis. The ceiling fan has become my arch nemesis. In the dark, the gears grind, like my teeth, like the thoughts wedging themselves between me and sleep. Miss Podesta's cat slides like a fish past my bedroom window, spitting at the moon I can't see. All I have to do is get up and go to the glass, to lean against it and peer out. But I don't want to look. I don't want to look at a moon my mother isn't allowed to see. Hasn't seen in 729 days. I reach for the stack of letters by my bed. I take one off the top, unfolding the thick paper, tracing the raised ink that has been raising me for 2 years. 2 years of sweet dreams, Raul. Do your homework, Raul. Be good to your uncle, Raul. I'm sorry, Raul. I miss you, Raul. I miss you too, Mom. Words, prayers, sometimes pressed, sometimes hammered, dark and deep like tattoo ink. And when I read them, I don't hear the rattle of the air conditioning or my uncle snoring in the next room or the whir of the ceiling fan. I hear my mother's voice ignited between my ears like a dream. a dream I'll have to wake up from the second I fall asleep, because that's when they come, when they always come, to take her away. And then the next poem is called Nobody Knows. When someone dies, people know exactly what to say. Not the right thing, not the true thing, but what's socially acceptable. There is a script we inherit, part of the good human handbook. But when someone goes to prison, there is no script, which means a lot of fumbling, a lot of forcing the words to come. People try their best with things like, your mother was such a sweet woman. She is. Your mother would be so proud of how you've handled this. She is. Or they try and fail miserably with things like, God works in mysterious ways, or everything happens for a reason. I smile, but behind gritted teeth, I scream, deep down in the places where no one else can hear. No, it doesn't. Then I get up on stage with the mediocre praise band I've been practicing with twice a week for 2 years, and I strum, playing simple chords that tie up the truth, a salve to my uncle's sermon, making it go down easy. Remember, he tells them, to give your pain to God. Nobody knows you're suffering like Jesus. Okay, so again, because our goal is to help the educators in the audience get these books to the kids who really need them, can each of you talk about your ideal reader? Who did you write this book for? And which aspects of your protagonist and or the story as a whole do you think that ideal reader will connect with the most? Francisco?
My ideal reader, I guess, is someone is someone who just hasn't found the right kind of book, that they haven't quite addressed that kind of the alienation that he feels, the isolation, that they're still kind of leaving him like it's missing something. So my books have serious topics, and they all kind of like go towards kind of finding the reader that I was when I was like 14 and 15, which was kind of a searching and looking for something that would some purpose and meaning to my life. And so I guess I tend to write to that young kid who was 13 and 14 and quite didn't quite fit in any place, and there was looking for a character that maybe was Mexican American just like him, who who had lost a father, who was in pain. And so one of the things that I do look for in a reader, though, and is kind of is that I try to find somebody that that I can give courage to, that I can feel all of my characters in some way or another have a sense of agency about them, that they can do something, even though they are in very tough circumstances, some of them. There is always kind of the sense that they that they can do something, and so I guess that's the sense that I want to give to the reader, this kind of this discouraged despite very difficult places in their life.
Yeah, and of course young people especially need exactly that. What about you, Hailey?
First and foremost, I wrote this book for biracial readers, mostly because I spent most of my life trying to make sense of what that identity means for me. I don't feel like I saw Latina characters that had kind of my experience in the books and the movies and TV shows that I watched. And I grew up not feeling like I was a real Mexican because I was only half and because I'm white passing. And I didn't learn the term white Latinx until I was in my 20s. And so if I can help a fellow biracial person make sense of where they come from and what their identity looks like in the world at large, that would be wonderful. I also wrote this book for strong-willed girls who are sometimes labeled unlikable, especially when they respond in difficult ways to difficult situations. That is my character, Ruby. She's tough, and she does not always react to the challenges she's faced with in ways that are ideal. But that doesn't make her any less worthy of love and support. That doesn't mean we should write her off. That means she's still worthy of growth. She's still worthy of being the hero of her own story. And I want young people to take that away, take that away from this book, that even when you mess up, that people will still rally around you, especially if you're still on a path of growth and healing and you're still trying to be a better version of yourself. But yeah, those are my two big targets.
Yeah, more unlikable girls. Yes, I could find that. Yeah. What about you, Federico?
Well, so I wrote Pedro Daniel as a tribute to my brother for my own therapy and for other intersectional individuals who have not seen themselves in the main characters of a book. But I have found that there are many readers who are not folks of color, not queer, and not neurodivergent, who really love Pedro and Daniel, both the book and the characters. They connect either because of empathy and because there is so much abuse and trauma in our society that we talked about a little bit already, that just, it seemed to be there, but no one really talks about it. It's just really, really eye-opening how many people have been reaching out to me about my book who look nothing like me, who are nothing like me in terms of my identities, because they are identifying with the abuse and trauma that they've experienced in their life.
Yeah, my answer is very similar to yours, especially in terms of what you said regarding empathy. I would say my ideal readers are not just the readers who identify with Dana and or Raul, but also the readers who want or need to have more empathy for people like them. I think An Appetite for Miracles, and I would go so far as to say all of our books are perfect for parents and their teens to read together. So it's not just a book for the reader who is struggling to love their body or dealing with the loss of a grandparent or, yearning for that type of connection that makes all of those things feel more survivable, like Dana's character is. And it's not just for the readers who feel like a constant disappointment to their parents or are struggling with their faith and figuring out what they believe or feeling helpless to fix the brokenness in their family and in the world, like Raul's character does. But this book is also for the people who need to learn how to love those kids better. Because even though both Dana and Raul feel like the weight of the world is on their shoulders, it's not any young person's job to fix what's broken. It's ours as adults. And I think reading these stories together can be a great place to start. Now, I do have some individual questions for each of you. I also want to remind people watching to please drop your own questions in the chat, as we will have some time for audience Q&A at the end. Also, if you haven't had a chance to fill out the free school visit form or the free book box form, definitely do that. My first question is for Francisco. You previously mentioned that your main character, Alberto, is dealing with schizophrenia, which is unique in that it is both incredibly isolating, while at the same time, the voice of Captain America is his constant companion. Can you talk about the title of the book, I Am Not Alone, how you came to it, and all of the different meanings that it holds as it relates to Alberto's mental health journey, as well as his relationship with Grace?
Sure. I mean, the title, I don't think I've ever put a title on any book that survived the editorial process. So it was my dear editor who came up with I Am Not Alone, which is a good title, and it. I Am Not Alone has kind of like a destructive connotation to it. Like Alberto's not alone. There's another voice that could be living in his head, that is very destructive. But at the same time, I think that one of the things that Alberto is kind of forced to say, is he's kind of forced to accept that mental illness cannot be healed without the help of somebody else or another, and part of the book deals, with the community that that accepts Alberto as a person, and that helps him kind of deal with that with that mental illness. So I am not alone is both like a statement of the person who is ill, who kind of surrenders and says, you know, I can't do it by myself. I mean, that's kind of like the initial point of the initial beginning of healing in kind of most circumstances, right? It's kind of like the Alcoholics Anonymous kind of, I accept that my life is unmanageable and I turn it over to a higher power. Well, in this case, I think that, you know, the beginning of healing for Alberto is kind of like accepting that he cannot deal with this voice himself, but needs a community to help him.
And again, theme of the night. I mean, community is so important. Asking for help is so important. I'm so appreciative that these books model that for young people, for sure. What about you, Hailey? Oh, actually, I have my own question for you specific to your book. So wildfires, like the one depicted in Up in Flames, are becoming increasingly more common due to climate change. Young people are not only dealing with the tangible effects of these natural disasters, but they're also living with a tremendous amount of climate anxiety, PTSD, and depression. Can you talk about how Ruby goes about the process of rebuilding not only her community, but herself in the aftermath of this tragedy, and why her example of resilience is important for us all when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it quite a bit, but Ruby is super strong-willed and determined, and perhaps to a fault. And so she initially approaches this problem like she would anything else, is like pragmatic, like I can handle this, I can do it. And it becomes very apparent very quickly that that's not the case. She realizes she doesn't in fact know it all, and that she can't do this by herself. And so as she contends with the long-term damage, she relies on others, she relies on her family, she relies on her new friend and possible love interest, Remy, to navigate these challenges. But most importantly, and this is where the social justice aspect of the story comes in, she has to listen to others about their experiences too. She quickly realizes that not everyone has suffered equitably, and that she learns a lot about environmental racism and how, you know, a lot of the lines of privilege have impacted or determined who is suffering the most from this natural disaster. So she really has to let her own worldview and sense of comfort be challenged as she listens to how other people have impacted, and then finds ways that she can leverage her own privilege to help those people. And this ultimately challenges her key understanding of resilience, and makes her journey not about getting her life back to normal, but getting to a place where she's a better person, where she is making more effort to be more community minded, and trying to learn from her shortcomings, both in dealing with this disaster and in the past as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson for all of us to learn, or a great reminder that when you're trying to help someone, it's better not to assume what they need. It's better to ask them what they need. And that's how you can be, you know, a great help and a great ally. And lastly, for Federico, Pedro and Daniel's story shows us the power of being accepted and affirmed. Can you talk about some specific moments in the story when this kind of affirmation brings about comfort and healing, as well as the harm that can be done when our expectations of someone don't align with who they really are? And how can we all be better at affirming and supporting others, especially those on the margins?
So those are great questions. I highlight two of my prior teachers in particular in my book. I don't use their real names, but they were instrumental to my becoming a perpetual student in life. Although I masked being gay, being neurodivergent, and having an abusive home life, my teachers saw me and cared for me as a student, as a child, and as a person. The answer to the last question is society's holy grail, I think. How can we all be better at affirming and supporting others? Ultimately, I think we have lost touch with the importance of empathy. We see hate, name-calling, bullying, and ridicule on our news feeds every single day. Being civil to one another is part of what makes us a civilization, a civilized society. We need to bring empathy back. If we had more empathy, we'd care about the poor, the sick, the hungry, the homeless, nature, wildlife, and our earth.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I don't want to speak for all of us, but I know for me as a writer and as a former teacher, you know, if I could give kids all day, every day to read and just consume, you know, media that builds empathy in them, I would, because that's the most powerful tool that I know for helping, you know, helping us all connect with others, see others' point of view, which is, again, why I'm so grateful for all of the educators who are here watching tonight, who have been participating in the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival, you know, all month long. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that so that you can then go tell your students about these books and encourage them to read more so that they can become more empathetic. I think it's time now to open up to some audience questions. So please continue dropping those in the chat if you haven't already. I think we might only have one question that I see that's come through. So if you have any more, please drop those. Okay. Do you have a team of mental health experts that you use for research as you write about such issues? And anyone, feel free to jump in on that.
You know, I don't have a team necessarily. I mean, a lot of it is just you rely on your kind of like your own experience and then build from that. But you can be sure that, you know, as the draft progresses, that is a series of psychologists and psychiatrists look at it to make sure that, you know, that I'm on the right track, you know. But so I would say that, you know, the writing about mental illness starts in many cases for most of us, you know, with a either an actual or an intuitive sense of the experience of mental illness. We do our own research because a lot of times we're trying to heal ourselves and figure out what's going on. And so that's an incredible amount of reading that takes place. And then when the character gets built, it's important to just go ahead and create a character that's a real person. And then afterwards, you know, look at it from the point of research and the point of view of experts to make sure that you have gotten things right. Very good question, then.
Yes. I would say that much of what's in Pedro and Daniel is lived experience, but I am a physician and I did a lot of rotations in mental health, and I found it to be fascinating. And I'm doing a lot of essays that deal with mental health, in particular because at my age, I'm having trouble getting good mental and medical health. And so I'm writing about it because, you know, in Boston at the Harvard, you know, one of the hubs of the best medical care in the world, it's not just myself, but many of my friends can't find good care. So I do have a lot of friends who are both in need of mental health care and who are mental health care providers that help me, you know, kind of help critique and proofread and that kind of stuff. So I use a variety of different things. And of course, there's always the internet for some of the more nuanced and data-driven information.
Yeah, I feel like my process is fairly similar to what Francisco and Federico have said. A lot of it is lived experience. And then there are sensitivity readers at certain stages who help kind of shed light onto some of the more specific issues. And I feel really lucky that my agent, my editor, and are really diverse and have a lot of different perspectives from their own lived experiences. So I feel like I've really got to benefit from both their professional and personal insight into my work.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's similar in that I, at least so far, have only written protagonists or point of view characters who share some aspect of my lived experience. And so I've been able to draw on that, especially in terms of mental health. But for example, I'm working on a book right now that has a lot to do with endometriosis. And so that has become very research intensive for me. Right now, I'm doing a lot of reading, and while I'm reading, collecting a lot of questions, which then hopefully I'll be able to seek out resources that I can interview to ask those questions to professionals and to also people who have endometriosis. So for me, each book, the process evolves, and the more I can branch out of my own personal lived experience, the more I do have to rely on others. Any other questions come through? Okay, how do you develop your characters so they are not cliches?
Something with the cliche thing, it's like the first thing that comes into your mind, don't write it. Because that's usually the kind of the usual thing. A lot of it is questioning yourself as you write. Is this something that Francisco Stork would say, or is this something that my character would say? And if it sounds like something I would say, I stay away from it. But also, I mean, just kind of keep away from the information that you're inundated with through media and through other books. I stopped reading other young adult books while I'm writing, just because I don't really want to contaminate it, and I want to preserve whatever originality is left in this old brain. But so you have to, there's a little bit of isolation, a little bit of like getting yourself in a I call it a little bubble of faith, where you kind of believe that you can do it, but at the same time you're protected a little bit from outside influences in order to kind of stay away from what you see other people doing, because you really want to write from your heart. You have to write with honesty, and that really has to come from you.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's I'm going to be a little bit provocative in my answer, because to be a cliche, it means that people recognize the character, and there are very few intersectional characters out there who have multiple identities. And sure, one of the identities might be a more cliched approach than the other, but in my research of my book, because even though it's lived experiences, I did a lot of research for the book. There aren't a lot of characters, if any, that I know of gay, Latino, neurodivergent boys who become men. I couldn't find any others. And if there are others, I would love to know about them. So it's a little bit more difficult, I would say, to be cliche when you've got so many layers to a person's personality and character.
Hopefully Hailey will jump back on with us in a moment. I know she's having some issues with her phone losing battery. I'll say that for me, it takes multiple rounds of revision to even figure out who my character is. I start with very few seeds, to be honest, and I consider myself a discovery writer and what I like to call a headlights writer, meaning I only plan ahead about 3 chapters at a time. And so I'm learning about these characters as I write them, and usually once I reach a point where I'm stuck and I don't know how to move forward, it's because I don't know them well enough. I need to go back to the beginning and reread and just try different things to tap into their voice. But I think voice is a big part of not making a character cliche, which, like you were saying, Federico, there are characters that we recognize, and that's not always a bad thing. I mean, a lot of us use archetypes. In certain genres, they work really well, like fantasy, for example. You have the archetype of the mentor figure and different characters who we might expect to see in certain setups. But I think when you're you know, trying to make someone feel like a real human being. I try to think about, you know, the real people in my own life, and usually people I love, and the things that I want to capture about them and save of them in my books. My books are, a lot of them are made up of memories that no one else would be able to recognize but me. And so things I love about my parents, my friends, my grandparents, my family members, you know, I'll take something from everyone and give it to all of these different, you know, protagonists, secondary characters across all of my stories. And, you know, maybe someday when I'm older, I'll go back and reread them. And that's how I'll be able to relive certain moments in my life and remember the people that I love. But that's another, you know, tactic that I use, is just giving aspects of people I really care about to these characters to make them feel more human. Do we have another question? Oh, there you are.
Hi, sorry. I know I mentioned my book came out yesterday, so things are a little crazy here. My phone died.
No worries. So the question was, how do you develop your characters so they are not cliches?
Yeah, and I'm so glad I got to answer this, because this is one of my favorites. I think it's really important to interrogate what traits you give characters and make sure it's intentional and not just something that is assumed about that character. And don't be afraid to make, I've talked about this a little bit already too, don't be afraid to make them unlikable. A lot of my early reviews are calling my characters messy and complex, and to me that's like music to my ears, because we are all messy and complex, and I think that needs to be seen and that needs to be acknowledged and even at times celebrated. So don't be afraid to have them mess up.
Agreed. Yeah. Making them too perfect, that's definitely going to make them feel like a cliche, or at least just not real and not human. Do we have another question? What would you say to young writers using this craft, I'm assuming writing, to address their mental health journey?
I think it's a wonderful way to reflect and to heal. It can be extremely cathartic, / emotional. I was at an event last night. I was telling people that I've read my book at least a couple hundred times. I'm obsessed with it. I really just am obsessed with it. I still cry during many parts of the book because it's cathartic. It's unbelievable to me to see it written down or to hear it in an audiobook. It's almost surreal, but it is a wonderful vehicle for self-reflection and for healing. I encourage it. And the use of poetry and poetic devices can really help with talking about very emotional issues.
One of the things that has helped me a lot is I started keeping a journal. I have this since I was a young person, and I still do it every day. And this is really, I think, how I learned how to write. You know, I think that the process of writing without with the knowledge that nobody's going to read that gives you this incredible spontaneity and freedom that you are then able to transfer to the process of writing a novel. And you know, a lot of the times, a lot of the thoughts that make up mental illness, you know, appear in as you write the journal, you know. And the writing of the novel itself, I consider a process of discovery, you know, where with like late, you don't really know where it's going to end up or what's going to happen and what you're going to discover in the process of writing. So it's this art, you know, of making putting words and trying to express what's inside of you. I think, as Federico says, it's just incredibly healing, you know, not only for you but hopefully for others as well.
very much resonate with what both of you said as well. And I also kind of want to bring it back to our unofficial theme of the night of being in community, really just connecting with other readers and writers who either you share identities with or you hold empathy for, just because writing is a very vulnerable craft. Whether you're seeking to publish or not, it's going to open up some things inside of you that are, you may not be prepared for, you maybe are and are still difficult. So really just building a community of people who you trust and who will support you as you start your own writing journey.
I think that's such an important point to make, especially for any educators watching who do, writing groups in your classroom, who do writer's workshop. The environment and the community that you build in that space is just as important as what you're asking them to write about or the tasks that you're giving them. My writing group that I have here in Austin, I'm so lucky that there are lots of Kidlit authors here in Austin where I live, and getting to meet with them and co-work once a week has a huge positive impact on my mental health. Obviously, students who are writing in the classroom or students who are just, writing for fun aren't having to deal with the trials and tribulations of traditional publishing, but they're still dealing with the trials and tribulations of life. And I think, writing, even if you're writing just yourself in a journal, that requires a lot of vulnerability. Having that support of other writers around you, even if you don't necessarily share your writing out loud, just knowing that they are there with you in that vulnerability, I think is really, really important. Do we have another question? Okay, things I love about my family and friends. I love this idea. Do you ever worry that people will recognize those parts of themselves in your work? Not really. My family doesn't really read my books. And the ones who have or claim that they have not said anything to me about it. I do think it's a possibility that they would recognize themselves. And if it's, ever made anyone uncomfortable, they haven't shared that with me. But I would love to throw this question to Federico, because your story is semi-autobiographical. So, and I know, like you were saying before, so many people, both in and out of the Latinx community, have really resonated with the book. How have friends and family reacted to it? And has anyone recognized themselves in the story?
So I want to be very clear that myself, I am Pedro, and my brother Daniel is Daniel. Other than that, and our parents, who obviously they are our parents. Other than that, everyone else is somewhat fictionalized, especially if it's something that would be a little bit unsettling or difficult to see on a page. I did mention that I've specifically pointed out a couple teachers from my childhood. I don't think that they would feel uncomfortable with what I had to say, because I loved them. I still love them. But I would say that I did ask my family not to read the book. I think that, like I said, it still triggers me every time I read it. And I don't recommend that for them, because I think it will trigger a lot for them. But they obviously are welcome to read the book. Outside of my family, my friends have loved the book. They, in many ways, they get to know me a lot more. In some cases, embarrassingly, a lot more. At my age, I'm thinking, I'm no longer ashamed of having been so naive and ignorant about all things adolescent for, that entire period of my life, which is primarily what the awkward and embarrassing scenes are for me in the book. But it doesn't really affect me anymore. I mean, some people do laugh about it with me, and I'm glad that they can laugh with it. And I think it's fine. I don't think anyone would be unhappy with a portrayal of themselves in the book. And I'm very careful. I am writing a sequel to it. It wasn't intentional. I was writing another book, and then it eventually dawned on me that the main character is in fact Pedro. So it is called Pedro without Daniel, which is tough, but I'm going to be same way. You know, I'm going to be very superficial with talking about anyone who would potentially see themselves in the book.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful that you set boundaries, and, you know, with your family, did that in an effort to protect them. My sophomore novel, Heartbreak Symphony, is inspired by losing my father to cancer when I was a teenager. And my mom hasn't read that book yet, and I don't know if she will, but I told her enough about it to kind of give her permission not to, knowing that it might be too painful for her to read. So I appreciate that. And I think that's something, you know, all writers can do. Like, we are all free to write about our experiences and our trauma in whatever ways that we want. But we also have the right to, you know, forewarn people that we care about that they don't have to go there with us if they don't want to.
Right.
Do we have another question? I thought I saw maybe one more. Okay. Do you have advice for how to go about building a writing community, especially for young writers? And anyone can take that one.
I'm happy to jump in. I feel like we're really quick to condemn social media, but I feel like there's a really good writing community on there. I've met a lot of my internet book friends that way. So, I mean, I think that way, and then also your teachers can help you build that community. My teachers were my first readers, and they can also help you find those other students who are interested in that too.
Yes, I agree. Social media is where I've met, in each case, you know, so there's a Facebook group, there's a Twitter group, and there's an Instagram group, and there is overlap of wonderful book creators, writers, illustrators, and translators that I would highly recommend tapping into. There are lots of organizations, including Latinx Kidlit Book Festival, SCBWI, 12 by 12 picture book for people who are interested in picture book writing. And then there are, most states have authors clubs and other ways to meet, you know, people and to create a critique group. I think, you know, a critique group is so important in helping not only to hear critique, but for you to learn to critique other work is so important. You learn a lot from how you critique other people's work. So those are some of the things I would recommend.
There's a lot of ways to, I think, also for us older guys and gals to be mentors to younger writers. You know, I think that we need diverse books and Latino publishing, Latinx Kidslit. They offer the opportunity, you know, to kind of have someone who has written a few times to read your manuscript and to help along. And so that community is not a, you know, it's not a big group, but it's a one-on-one, but it is a community, and it's an important one, you know, to be able to share our experience with young writers. It's just, I think it's one of our responsibilities, quite frankly.
And I'll just say quickly, something that I used to do when I was in the classroom is I used to host NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. And if you're a teacher watching or a librarian, it's something that you can do before school. Like in the 20 minutes before school, kids come in and they do some sprints, some writing sprints. I think kids have a lot of fun creating a profile on the NaNoWriMo website if you create a classroom there, you can have all of the kids from the same school be in the same classroom and they can chat with each other. And it has some functions that are similar to social media, but it's in a controlled environment that you can, see all the communication that's going on. And the fact that it's like a month-long challenge, there's something really fun and exciting about that. And, hopefully those kids that meet and come together in November really enjoy that experience and end up writing together throughout the rest of the school year. And you can figure out different ways for, what that should look like. Maybe you go on to have them all revise their novel together or something like that. But for me, NaNoWriMo was a really fun way to kind of kick off the idea of kids writing in community together. So that would be like a practical tip of mine. So we are getting to the end of our time together. Before we wrap up, can you please let people know where they can find you online? Francisco?
Yes, franciscostork.com. It's easy. You'll find me there.
Hailey?
I'm also at HaileyAlcaraz.com, but I am far more active on Instagram and TikTok. It's Alcaraz, just like my name, Alcaraz Books.
And I am on Twitter, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at Federico Erebia. And then my website is fjebooks.com.
Thank you. And I am at Laekan Zea Kemp on all social media platforms. You can mostly find me on TikTok these days, but I do have a newsletter that you can subscribe to on my website if you'd like to keep in touch that way. Thank you so much to our panelists for their amazing insights. Thank you to all of you for watching. Before we go, please don't forget to fill out the forms in the chat to enter to win a free author visit or one of our specially curated book boxes. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Bye, everyone.